Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe's global stardom in the late 1950s concealed a maze of troubling undercurrents behind the scenes. Among the most contentious figures in her inner circle was Dr. Ralph Greenson, the psychiatrist who treated her during her final years. According to biographer Donald Spoto, Greenson ventured well beyond clinical norms, immersing himself in her daily life and supposedly dictating who she could meet or call. Medical records confirm Monroe was prescribed potent sedatives like Nembutal and chloral hydrate under his care. While the official ruling on August 5, 1962, deemed her death a probable self-inflicted substance-related incident, various analysts claim that excessive medication, perhaps facilitated by Greenson, might have contributed. That notion remains fiercely debated. On the financial front, Monroe's situation was similarly disordered. Despite her substantial income, her estate was valued at around $800,000 upon her death, roughly equivalent to $7 million today. Not meager, yet still below expectations for a worldwide luminary. Her longtime business manager, Inez Melson, came under fire for her oversight of Monroe's finances, though explicit charges of tax evasion remain unsubstantiated. Contrary to some accounts, Melson was not designated executor of Monroe's estate. That role fell to her attorney, Aaron Frosch. Following her passing, Monroe's personal effects became fuel for tabloid sensationalism. Gossip persists that private letters and diary entries surfaced within mere weeks. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, later provided inconsistent narratives of Monroe's last hours, further stoking speculation. Some believe Murray may have had access to sensitive documents, although no definitive proof ties her to any leaks. Then came Paula Strasberg, Monroe's acting coach and confidant. Married to Lee Strasberg, who would ultimately inherit the bulk of Monroe's estate, Paula was ever present on film sets. While certain observers regarded her as nurturing, others deemed her influence excessive. Director Billy Wilder labeled her presence disruptive. Monroe reportedly became deeply dependent on her, with journalist Anthony Summers noting that Strasberg often mediated the star's dealings with others. Some commentators suggest this reliance might have pushed Monroe into further isolation. By the early 1960s, Monroe's trust in her entourage had crumbled. Photographer George Barris later alleged that she confided, "They're all using me, they all want something." Monroe's final chapter was undeniably entwined with ambiguous loyalties, dubious direction, and a growing sense of betrayal from those she believed she could rely on. Judy Garland. Judy Garland's meteoric rise carried a devastating toll, much of it engineered by the very people she trusted. Studio executives at MGM, desperate to keep their young star on grueling film schedules, were said to have provided her with amphetamines to keep her awake and barbiturates to induce sleep. Biographer Gerald Clark, in Get Happy, The Life of Judy Garland, details how this potent regimen began as early as her time on The Wizard of Oz in 1939. Garland herself later recounted how pills were handed to her around the clock merely to keep functioning. Yet the duplicity didn't end behind studio walls. Garland claimed her mother, Ethel Gum, was the first to trap her in the cycle, supposedly administering stimulants during vaudeville shows for extra stage energy, though this allegation remains debated by historians. Speculation abounds about Ethel's ironclad hold on her daughter's career, with some accounts depicting her as more of a manager than a parent. Financially, Garland's reality was equally grim. Despite ranking among the top-paid stars of the 1940s, she fell into staggering debt. While exact numbers are disputed, accounts indicate she owed considerable back taxes by the early 1950s. Some insiders blamed her tumultuous spending habits, while others accused her managers and agents of severe mismanagement and even siphoning off her finances. Garland's entourage often treated her as a mere money-making asset, rather than an individual. When her mental health deteriorated and her substance issues intensified, those in her circle allegedly brushed her off as difficult instead of giving genuine assistance. MGM ultimately ended her contract in 1950, in spite of her enduring box office draw. Years later, Garland reportedly lamented that she was viewed simply as a money machine, a chilling comment on a life shaped and exploited by the very people meant to watch over her. Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow rose to stardom in the early 1930s, but her success came at a steep personal cost. Her mother, Jean Harlow Carpenter, later Jean Bello after remarrying, was a driving influence in her life, often accused of controlling her daughter's every move. Behind-the-scenes observers claim that Mama Jean prioritized her own ambitions over Harlow's well-being, steering her toward roles that reinforced the bombshell image while dismissing the actress's desire for more serious parts. Biographer David Sten, in his book Bombshell: The Life and Death of Jean Harlow, detailed how Harlow's career was shaped more by those managing her than by her own choices. The mystery deepened in September of 1932 when Harlow's husband, MGM executive Paul Byrne, was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound just 2 months after their wedding. The official story was straightforward, yet the grapevine buzzed. Some insisted that MGM executives arrived at the scene before authorities and may have altered evidence to protect Harlow's image. While no hard proof surfaced, the studio's aggressive hold over its stars at the time keeps the theory alive in Hollywood lore. As her fame grew, so did the pressure. Harlow's agents and managers doubled down on her sex symbol persona, ignoring her repeated pleas for more nuanced roles. She once famously said, "I'd rather be a failure on my own than a success on someone else's terms." Film historians like Donald Bogle later described her as a prisoner of her own image, used, marketed, and ultimately neglected. By mid-1937, her health was in freefall. Suffering from kidney failure, Harlow experienced severe symptoms including fatigue and swelling. Yet her entourage allegedly downplayed the signs, pushing her to continue filming Saratoga. She fell gravely ill on set in late May and died on June 7th at just 26 years old. Medical understanding of kidney disease at the time was limited, but some biographers argue that her handlers failed to recognize or chose to ignore the seriousness of her condition. After her death, her million-dollar estate became a battleground. Legal disputes erupted among family members and advisors. Some accounts hint at financial mismanagement and embezzlement behind closed doors. Her legacy, once carefully curated by the studio system, was now tangled in speculation and regret. Even decades later, Jean Harlow remains a symbol of Hollywood's golden age, and a stark reminder of how fame, poor guidance, and misplaced trust can collide with tragic consequences. Montgomery Clift. In May of 1956, Montgomery Clift's career, and his health, took a brutal hit in a late-night car crash outside Elizabeth Taylor's Beverly Hills home. His jaw was shattered, cheekbones crushed, and the haunting beauty that made him a leading man was forever altered. After months of reconstructive surgery, Clift returned to filming Raintree County in late July, his face partially rebuilt, his pain concealed behind studio makeup and forced smiles. But instead of shielding him, his entourage appeared more focused on salvaging his image. Publicists reportedly downplayed the severity of his injuries, while his manager pushed him back into production before he was fully recovered. Biographer Patricia Bosworth noted that Clift's reliance on painkillers and alcohol intensified during this period. Talk persists that members of his inner circle leaked stories to gossip columnists, painting him as unreliable and unstable. Those murmurs stuck. Studios grew wary despite his powerful performances in films like The Misfits and Judgment at Nuremberg. Some insiders claimed his manager prioritized contracts over care, turning a blind eye as Clift's health unraveled. By the mid-1960s, he was working less, haunted by a system that once celebrated him. When he died in July of 1966 at just 45, the official cause was a heart attack. But many close to him believed the real damage had been done years earlier, not by fate, but by those paid to protect him. As Bosworth later reflected in her biography, Clift was a man destroyed by forces both within and around him. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge made history in 1955 as the first black woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar, but her groundbreaking career was quietly undermined from within. Her financial collapse was tied to her business manager, Nicholas Costas, who mismanaged her earnings and failed to pay taxes, leaving her in debt despite her success. Dandridge invested heavily in a failed restaurant venture and was forced to rely on nightclub gigs just to stay afloat. While her manager Earl Mills remained a loyal advocate and later wrote her biography, some critics argue she lacked the legal and financial safeguards that white contemporaries often received. Typecasting was another setback. Despite her talent, studios repeatedly offered her roles that leaned into racial stereotypes. Though she resisted, her advisors reportedly insisted she accept them, fearing she'd be blacklisted. According to biographer Donald Bogle, Dandridge privately lamented, "If I were white, I could capture the world." Her mental health struggles were dismissed as temperamental, a term that concealed the emotional toll of systemic racism and professional isolation. On September 8, 1965, Dandridge was discovered lifeless in her Los Angeles apartment by Earl Mills. The official cause? An embolism related to a foot fracture, with a substance-related incident involving the antidepressant tofranil cited as a contributing factor. Whispers have persisted about possible neglect or deeper issues, marking her death at age 42, a heartbreaking end to a career that had the potential for far greater heights. For decades, Hollywood largely overlooked her, but renewed interest has since re-evaluated her legacy, not just as a pioneer, but as a sobering example of how the very system designed to propel performers could also abandon them. Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth reached the zenith of Hollywood allure in the 1940s, but off-camera, disloyalty eroded her lasting impact. Her marriage to Orson Welles, legendary director of Citizen Kane, began with optimism in September 1943, but dissolved into quiet dissatisfaction by November 1947. Biographer Barbara Leeming recounts Hayworth once confiding to a friend that Welles desired the freedom of a bachelor while still holding on to her, a sentiment that resonated throughout their strained union. By the time her most celebrated role in Gilda dazzled audiences in 1946, Hayworth was already a superstar, though the part locked her into a temptress persona she couldn't escape. Her frustration was encapsulated in her now famous remark, "Men go to bed with Gilda, but wake up with me." Studio heads and agents capitalized on the illusion, repeatedly slotting her into roles that emphasized allure over complexity. Her third marriage to Prince Ali Khan in 1949 seemed to present a regal sanctuary, yet talk persisted that Khan, the Aga Khan's son, leveraged the union to elevate his own standing in European high society. The pair separated in 1951, formalizing divorce in January 1953, leaving Hayworth to raise their daughter alone. Financially, her situation was just as dire. Despite being among Hollywood's top earners of the era, her wealth was drained by years of poor guidance. Some sources fault missteps by agents and money managers, while others allege she was kept in the dark too often. By the 1960s, her income had withered substantially. As her health waned in the 1970s, early signs of Alzheimer's disease were reportedly dismissed by certain insiders as diva behavior, a mislabeling that postponed proper treatment until 1980. Her condition consequently became one of the first widely recognized public cases of the illness, altering public perceptions. Hayworth passed away in 1987, her legacy inextricably tied to the brilliance and the disloyalty of Hollywood's golden era. Buster Keaton. Buster Keaton was once hailed as the silent film comedy luminary, but by the late 1920s his career took a drastic plunge, propelled by choices and influences that many say undermined his enduring contribution. In 1928, Keaton signed with a Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, a step fervently encouraged by his producer and confidant Joe Schenck. On paper, it promised wider mainstream support. In reality, it stripped Keaton of the creative freedom that had defined his genius. No longer writing or directing, he found himself performing pre-scripted sketches under rigid studio constraints. While MGM never openly derided his signature deadpan, the studio's methodical approach to talkies clashed with his subtle comedic approach. His first sound film, Free and Easy, 1930, was harshly criticized, fueling the suspicion that MGM had no clear plan for Buster Keaton. Off-camera, the downward spiral continued. His wife, Natalie Talmadge, linked to the influential Talmadge acting family, allegedly handled his finances, but, according to Keaton's later accounts, also restricted his access to his own money. Biographers propose she spent extravagantly while subjecting him to a minimal allowance. By the early 1930s, Keaton was financially drained. There are claims some MGM partners claimed credit for his trademark gags, edging him out of the creative process. Although these assertions primarily stem from Keaton's own recollections and remain unverified, they reinforce the narrative of a once revered innovator being pushed from his own art. Burdened by personal and professional setbacks, he turned increasingly to alcohol. He was hospitalized for alcoholism in the mid-1930s. Accounts vary on the exact date. And shortly after, MGM parted ways with him. Though he later saw modest gains through television and supporting film roles in the 1950s, the harm was lasting. Many film scholars argue that had Keaton preserved his artistic control, he might have transitioned to sound as gracefully as Chaplin or Lloyd. Instead, his decline stands as a stark example of how Hollywood's power brokers, and those he trusted, played a part in derailing a cinematic trailblazer. Vivien Leigh. Vivien Leigh's rise to stardom was meteoric. 2 Academy Awards and global acclaim by the early 1950s. But behind the curtain, her life unraveled under the weight of a misunderstood mental health condition and a support system that often failed her. Diagnosed posthumously with what is now recognized as bipolar disorder, Leigh endured erratic treatment methods common at the time. According to biographer Hugo Vickers, those around her, including doctors and studio personnel, frequently turned to sedatives and tranquilizers to manage her symptoms, prioritizing performance over recovery. To this day, speculation persists that her care was more about image control than genuine health support. Her marriage to Laurence Olivier added another layer of complexity, with Laurence expressing regret over how her condition was handled. Some scholars have observed that Leigh's entourage, including close staff, may have shared private details with the press as her condition worsened, allegedly feeding the gossip press that turned her into a tragic headline. The timing of leaks during her most vulnerable years has sparked intense debate. Financially, Leigh was among the highest-paid actresses of her era, yet her estate at the time of her passing in July of 1967 was far smaller than expected. While some biographical accounts suggest poor financial oversight or neglect, concrete documentation of mismanagement remains elusive. Whispers persist that advisors failed to secure long-term investments or safeguard her earnings, but no formal investigation was ever launched. Her role as Blanche de Beauvoir in A Streetcar Named Desire, a character she returned to repeatedly, has been cited as emotionally draining. In interviews, she once confessed that the character nearly consumed her. Though the exact quote varies across sources, the sentiment is widely accepted. Others propose that her handlers encouraged her to take on emotionally volatile roles to maintain her dramatic prestige, regardless of the psychological cost. Vivien Leigh's story remains a chilling case of fame colliding with fragility. Her legacy is now often reframed through the lens of systemic neglect, where the very people meant to protect her may have contributed to her decline, intentionally or not. James Dean as Jim Stark. James Dean's stardom soared swiftly, but the aftermath of his death in September 1955 ignited controversies that linger today. Already in the spotlight for his performance in East of Eden, Dean became an icon following the car accident that claimed his life at only 24. When Rebel Without a Cause premiered on October 27th, barely a month later, some wondered whether Warner Brothers exploited the tragedy for attention. Although the studio had planned the film for autumn, gossip emerged that both the scheduling and the promotional angle discreetly leveraged Dean's untimely demise. Posters and publicity emphasized his intense persona, blurring the divide between the troubled teen he portrayed and the young actor behind the scenes. Dean's agent, Jane Deasy, and longtime publicist Dick Clayton played leading roles in shaping his posthumous legend. Although no direct proof exists of them cashing in immediately through merchandising, the larger industry rushed to license Dean's likeness, often without well-defined legal protocols. At that time, a deceased star's publicity rights were in flux, and Dean's father, Wynton, apparently had minimal control over how his son's image was commercialized. Some legal experts now regard the Dean case as a pivotal moment in the development of estate protections. Even those closest to Dean felt marginalized. Dennis Hopper, who acted alongside him in Giant, later voiced annoyance over how marketers, rather than colleagues, shaped Dean's aura. Natalie Wood, his co-star in Rebel, was said to believe the myth surrounding Dean bore little resemblance to the person she knew. Whether the result of conscious planning or not, their voices were drowned out by a finely crafted storyline, one that served studio coffers more than Dean's genuine identity. Ultimately, Dean epitomized youthful defiance, yet the machinery behind his legend was anything but rebellious. It was carefully orchestrated, commercial, and, some assert, a grievous disservice by those tasked with safeguarding his image. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.